The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across Vincent Corleone's marble foyer as he heard the Bentley's engine purr to a stop outside his Manhattan penthouse. His manicured fingers tightened around the champagne flute, the Dom Perignon suddenly tasting like ash in his mouth. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched her emerge from the back seat. Zoe Cross, the woman who'd once shared his bed, his dreams, and his empire before walking away with nothing but her dignity intact. But she wasn't alone. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to my channel where we dive deep into stories that'll make your heart race and your mind spin. I can already feel the energy through the screen. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Are you Team Justice or Team Forgiveness? And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, what are you waiting for? This story is about to take you on a ride you'll never forget. Vincent's breath caught in his throat as a tall, lean teenager stepped out beside her. The boy moved with an elegance that seemed familiar, his dark skin glowing under the building's entrance lights. Vincent had never seen this kid before, he was certain of it. Yet something about the way the teenager carried himself, the confident tilt of his chin, made Vincent's blood run cold. "Sir?" His assistant Margaret's voice trembled from behind him. Your guests have arrived." Vincent forced his shoulders back, straightening the Armani jacket that suddenly felt too tight across his chest. He'd built Sterling Industries from nothing into a $20 billion empire. He'd survived hostile takeovers, boardroom coups, and media scandals that would have destroyed lesser men. But watching Zoe Cross walk toward his door with a mysterious teenager in tow felt like staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. The doorbell's melodic chime echoed through the penthouse, each note striking Vincent like a physical blow. He'd invited her here to prove a point, to show her what she'd given up when she'd refused his marriage proposal 15 years ago, to demonstrate that Vincent Corleone always won in the end. So why did he suddenly feel like he was about to lose everything? "Shall I get the door, sir?" Margaret whispered. Vincent shook his head, his jaw clenching. Whatever game Zoe was playing, whatever this was about, he wouldn't show weakness. Not in his own home. Not on Thanksgiving. Not ever. He strode toward the entrance, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble with military precision. Each step felt like a march toward his own execution. His hand closed around the gold-plated handle, and for one suspended moment, Vincent Corleone, the man who'd never shown fear to anyone, hesitated. Through the frosted glass, he could see two silhouettes waiting. Patient. Predatory. Vincent yanked the door open with more force than necessary, his practiced smile sliding into place like armor. Zoe. Right on time. She stood there in a burgundy wool coat that hugged her curves, her natural hair swept back in an elegant updo that showcased the graceful line of her neck. At 42, she was even more stunning than she'd been at 27. Success looked good on her. There was a confidence in her dark eyes that hadn't been there before, a power that made Vincent's chest tighten with something he refused to name. "Vincent." Her voice was honey over steel. "Thank you for the invitation." But Vincent couldn't focus on her words. His gaze kept drifting to the teenager beside her. The boy was maybe 16, 17 at most, with intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Vincent's face. He wore a navy blazer and dark jeans, nothing expensive, but he carried himself like royalty. "And this is?" Vincent's voice came out rougher than he'd intended. Zoe's smile was a blade wrapped in silk. "Vincent, I'd like you to meet Connor Parker." She placed her hand on the boy's shoulder with maternal pride. "My son." The words hit Vincent like a sledgehammer to the chest. Son. Zoe had a son. A son who looked to be 15 or 16 years old. Vincent's mind raced, calculating dates, remembering their last night together before she'd walked away from his proposal, from him, from everything they'd built together. "Your son." Vincent's tongue felt thick, clumsy. "I didn't know you had children." "There's a lot you don't know about me anymore," Zoe replied smoothly. "May we come in? It's getting cold." Vincent stepped aside mechanically, his world tilting off its axis. As they passed him, Connor looked up, and Vincent's heart stopped. Those eyes, dark, intelligent, calculating, were like looking into a mirror from 30 years ago. "It's nice to finally meet you, Mr. Corleone," Connor said, extending his hand with perfect manners. "Mom's told me so much about you." Vincent stared at the offered hand, his mind reeling. Finally meet him? What did that mean? And more importantly, why did this boy's voice sound exactly like his own had at that age? "The pleasure's mine," Vincent managed, shaking the teenager's hand. The boy's grip was firm, confident, unnervingly familiar. As they moved into the living room where his current wife Rebecca and their 2 young daughters waited, Vincent felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He'd built his entire empire on reading people, on anticipating their moves, on staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But standing in his own home, watching Zoe Cross smile at his family with the patience of a chess master about to call checkmate, Vincent realized he'd never felt more blind in his life. The Thanksgiving turkey might be in the oven, but Vincent Corleone was starting to suspect he was the one about to get carved up. And the boy, this Connor Parker who looked at him with eyes that reflected his own, might just be holding the knife. The marble floors of Vincent's penthouse echoed with the sound of heels and polished shoes as the unlikely gathering moved toward the living room. Vincent's current wife, Rebecca, rose from the cream leather sofa with the practiced grace of a woman who'd perfected the art of playing hostess to her husband's business associates and enemies alike. "Rebecca, darling." Vincent's voice carried just a hint of strain as he made the introductions. "This is Zoe Cross, an old business partner, and her son, Connor Parker. Rebecca Sterling, née Theron from the Italian Job," Vincent noted absently, his mind still reeling, extended a manicured hand toward Zoe. At 34, Rebecca was blonde, beautiful, and blissfully unaware that her husband's net worth had just become the least of her problems. "How wonderful to meet you," Rebecca said, her smile as perfect as her diamond tennis bracelet. Vincent rarely talks about his early business days. Zoe's handshake was firm, confident. "Oh, Vincent and I go way back. We were very close colleagues." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Vincent watched his 2 daughters, Emma, 8 and Sophie, 6, peer around their mother's legs with curious eyes. They looked so young, so innocent, so completely unprepared for whatever storm Zoe was about to unleash. "Connor, you're about the same age as our neighbor's son," Rebecca continued, oblivious to the tension crackling through the room. "Do you play any sports?" "I fence," Connor replied with quiet confidence. "And I'm on the debate team at school." Vincent's breath caught. He'd been a champion fencer in prep school, captain of the debate team at Harvard. The coincidences were piling up like evidence in a criminal trial. "How fascinating." Rebecca clapped her hands together. "Vincent, didn't you fence in school?" "Among other things," Vincent managed, his eyes never leaving Connor's face. The boy was watching him with an intensity that made Vincent's skin crawl, like he was being studied under a microscope. Margaret appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. "Sir, dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. Should I set additional places?" "Of course," Zoe answered before Vincent could speak. "We wouldn't want to impose, but Connor and I are so grateful for the invitation." She turned to Vincent with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "After all, it's been 15 years since we last spoke." 15 years. The number hit Vincent like a physical blow. Connor was 16, maybe 17. The math was simple, devastating, impossible to ignore. "Mom," Connor spoke up, his voice cutting through Vincent's spiraling thoughts. "Should I tell Mr. Corleone about my school project?" Zoe's smile turned predatory. "Oh yes, sweetheart. I think Vincent would be very interested in your research." Vincent felt like he was drowning in plain sight. "Research?" Connor pulled out his phone with the casual confidence of a generation raised on technology. "I'm doing a presentation on successful business leaders for my AP history class. Specifically, I'm researching the early days of Sterling Industries." He looked up at Vincent with those unervingly familiar eyes. "Your rise from nobody to billionaire is quite the story, Mr. Corleone." The room seemed to shrink around Vincent. "Is that so?" "Oh yes. I've been digging deep into public records, newspaper archives, court documents." Connor's voice was casual, but his words were precision strikes. "It's amazing what you can find if you know where to look. For instance, did you know that Sterling Industries' first major contract came from a company that mysteriously went bankrupt just 3 months later?" Rebecca laughed nervously. "Connor, that sounds like quite the coincidence." "I don't believe in coincidences," Connor replied, never breaking eye contact with Vincent. "I believe in patterns. And Vincent Corleone's business practices show some very interesting patterns." Vincent's hands clenched into fists at his sides. This teenager, this boy who might be his son, was threatening him in his own home, in front of his wife and daughters, and he was doing it with surgical precision. "Connor's quite the little investigator," Zoe said proudly, running her fingers through her son's hair. "He gets that from his father." The casual mention of Connor's father felt like a knife between Vincent's ribs. "And Connor's father is?" "Not here," Zoe replied simply. but his influence is felt every day. Vincent's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. If Connor was his son, and everything about the boy suggested he was, then Zoe had kept his existence secret for 16 years. Why? And more importantly, why reveal him now? Uncle Vincent, 8-year-old Emma tugged on his jacket. Can Connor see my room? I got new princess decorations. The innocence of his daughter's request cut through the tension like a blade. Vincent looked down at Emma's bright eyes, then at Sophie, who was hiding behind Rebecca's legs, then at Connor, who was watching the family dynamic with the analytical gaze of a scientist studying specimens. Maybe after dinner, sweetheart, Vincent said softly, his heart breaking at the trust in his daughter's face. Whatever Zoe was planning, whatever revenge she'd come to extract, his innocent children would be caught in the crossfire. Actually, Connor said, his voice gentle when he addressed Emma, I'd love to see your room. My mom always says I need to learn how to talk to people my own age better. Emma giggled. You're way older than me. Not where it counts, Connor replied with a smile that transformed his face. For a moment, the calculating observer disappeared, and Vincent caught a glimpse of what the boy might be like when he wasn't on a mission. And that smile, that genuine warm smile, was pure Vincent Corleone at 16. You're very good with children, Rebecca observed. Do you have younger siblings? No, Connor replied, his analytical mask sliding back into place. I'm an only child. Mom says I'm all she needs. The words hit Vincent like a sledgehammer. If Connor was his son, then Zoe had raised him alone. She'd built a life, a family, without him. The woman he'd once loved, the woman he'd asked to marry him, had disappeared and created a whole world that he'd never been part of. Mom worked very hard to give me everything I needed, Connor continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. She's the strongest person I know. She taught me that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when powerful people try to silence you. Vincent felt the walls closing in. Every word Connor spoke sounded like an indictment, a threat, a promise of retribution. But for what? What had Vincent done that warranted this elaborate setup? Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman, Rebecca said warmly. She is, Connor agreed, moving to stand beside Zoe with protective instincts that reminded Vincent painfully of himself. She's brilliant, beautiful, and she never lets anyone take advantage of her. Not anymore. Not anymore. The words echoed in Vincent's head like a death sentence. Well, Rebecca clapped her hands together, clearly uncomfortable with the undercurrents she couldn't understand. Why don't we all sit down? Margaret made her famous appetizers, and I'm sure everyone could use something to eat. As they settled into the plush seating arrangement, Rebecca and the girls on one sofa, Zoe and Connor on another, Vincent alone in his leather chair like a king on a crumbling throne. Vincent tried to process the magnitude of his situation. If Connor was his son, then everything Vincent thought he knew about his life was a lie. If Zoe was here for revenge, then his empire, his family, his future were all at risk. And if that 16-year-old boy really had been digging into Sterling Industries' early business practices. Vincent Corleone had built his fortune on calculated risks, strategic moves, and staying ahead of the competition. But sitting in his own living room, watching his alleged son examine family photos on the mantel with the intensity of a detective gathering evidence, Vincent realized he might have finally met his match. And the most terrifying part? He was starting to suspect that match was his own flesh and blood. The question wasn't whether Zoe Cross had come for revenge. The question was whether Vincent would survive it. The crystal glasses clinked softly as Margaret served champagne to the adults and sparkling cider to Connor, but the festive sound felt hollow in the tension-thick air. Vincent watched over the rim of his glass as Connor pulled out a thick manila folder from his backpack. A move so casual it might have seemed innocent if not for the predatory gleam in the teenager's eyes. Mr. Corleone, Connor said, setting the folder on the coffee table with deliberate precision. I hope you don't mind, but I brought some of my research to show you. Mom said you might be interested in seeing what I've discovered about Sterling Industries' early acquisitions. Vincent's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. The folder was thick, professional, and had the look of something compiled by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. That's thoughtful of you. Connor's always been thorough, Zoe said, her voice warm with maternal pride and cold with something else entirely. When he sets his mind to understanding something, he doesn't stop until he has all the pieces. Rebecca leaned forward with genuine curiosity. How exciting. Vincent, you never told me Connor was studying your company. Because I didn't know, Vincent replied carefully, his eyes never leaving the folder. Whatever was in there, it was the reason Zoe had brought her son, their son, here tonight. Connor opened the folder with the confidence of a prosecutor presenting evidence. It started as a simple school assignment, but the more I dug, the more fascinating it became. For instance, he pulled out a stack of photocopied documents. In 1994, Sterling Industries acquired 3 competing firms in the span of 6 months. Each company had been struggling financially, but they all had one thing in common. Vincent's blood turned to ice. 1994. The year he'd built his empire on the graves of his competitors' dreams. They all had contracts with Meridian Corporation, Connor continued, his young voice carrying the authority of someone who'd done his homework. A company that, interestingly enough, went bankrupt just weeks before Sterling Industries swooped in to acquire their clients. The room had gone deadly quiet. Even Emma and Sophie seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, moving closer to their mother with the instinct of children who recognized danger even when they couldn't name it. "Sweetheart," Rebecca said carefully, "maybe this is a conversation for after dinner." "No," Zoe interrupted smoothly. "I think this is exactly the right time. After all, Vincent invited us here to reconnect. What better way than to appreciate the foundation of everything he's built?" Vincent forced his expression to remain neutral even as his mind raced. Meridian Corporation. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 15 years. The company that had been his secret weapon, his way of destabilizing competitors before moving in for the kill. The company that only 3 people in the world knew he'd secretly owned. Himself, his lawyer, who died 5 years ago in a convenient car accident. And, "How did you know about Meridian?" The words escaped before Vincent could stop them. Connor's smile was razor-sharp. "I told you, Mr. Corleone. I'm very thorough. And I had a very good teacher." He glanced at his mother with obvious affection. "Mom always said that if something seems too convenient to be coincidence, it probably isn't." Vincent felt the world tilting beneath him. Zoe knew. Somehow, impossibly, Zoe Cross knew about Meridian Corporation. She knew about the shell companies, the manufactured bankruptcies, the systematically destroyed lives that had built his empire. But how? He'd been so careful. Mom worked for one of those companies, Connor continued conversationally, pulling out another document. Cross and Associates, a small but successful consulting firm that had just landed their biggest contract ever. With Meridian Corporation, Vincent's vision blurred. Cross and Associates, Zoe's family business. Her father's legacy that she'd taken over after his death. The company that had been collateral damage in Vincent's rise to power. "I remember that contract," Zoe said softly, her voice carrying 15 years of buried pain. "Biggest deal my family had ever seen. $3 million over 2 years. We hired new employees, expanded our office, took out loans to handle the increased capacity." Her dark eyes locked onto Vincent's. "We built our entire future around that contract." Vincent couldn't breathe. He remembered it now, remembered targeting Cross and Associates because they were small enough to destroy, big enough to matter. He'd used Meridian to give them a contract so large it would overextend them, then pulled the rug out from under them when they were most vulnerable. He just hadn't known that Zoe Cross was the same Zoe he'd been falling in love with at the monthly business networking events they'd both attended. When Meridian suddenly went bankrupt, Connor continued with the relentless precision of someone delivering a killing blow. Cross and Associates was left holding millions in unpaid invoices. They'd already done the work, hired the staff, made the investments. Within 3 months, they lost everything. "Everything," Zoe whispered, her voice barely audible. "My father's life work. 20 years of building trust and relationships gone overnight. We lost our office, our home, our reputation. My mother had a nervous breakdown. My father..." She paused, gathering herself. "My father never recovered. He died 2 years later, convinced he'd failed everyone he'd ever loved." Vincent felt like he was drowning in quicksand. Every word was another weight pulling him down, another revelation that made his carefully constructed world crumble a little more. "But that's not the best part," Connor said, his teenage voice carrying a coldness that made Vincent's blood freeze. "The really interesting thing is what happened next." Vincent didn't want to hear what came next. He could feel Rebecca's confused stare, sense his daughter's growing unease, taste the metallic flavor of his own destruction in the air. 6 months after Cross and Associates went under, Connor continued, Sterling Industries acquired their entire client base. Every single contract, Every relationship my grandfather had spent decades building. All of it transferred to your company for pennies on the dollar. Vincent, Rebecca whispered, her face pale. Is this true? Vincent couldn't answer. Couldn't deny. Couldn't explain that it had been business. That he'd never known Zoe was connected to Cross and Associates until it was too late. Couldn't justify the systematic destruction of her family's legacy. Oh, but we're not done yet, Connor said, his eyes bright with the thrill of the hunt. Because the most interesting discovery came last month, when I was going through Mom's old papers. I found something she'd saved from 2009. A letter. Vincent's heart stopped beating. A letter from a lawyer's office, Connor continued, informing my mother that she was pregnant and asking if she wanted to pursue paternity proceedings against Vincent Corleone. The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent could hear his own heartbeat, Rebecca's sharp intake of breath, the distant sound of traffic 15 floors below. Connor, Zoe said softly, her voice filled with a mother's love and a warrior's fury. Why don't you tell Mr. Corleone what my response was to that letter? Connor's smile was pure predator. She said no. She said she'd rather raise her child alone than force a relationship with a man who destroyed families for profit. She said she wanted nothing from Vincent Corleone except for him to stay away from us forever. Vincent felt something inside his chest crack open. The boy was his son, his own flesh and blood, raised without his knowledge, taught to see him as the villain who'd destroyed their family. And she kept that promise, Connor continued. For 16 years, she built a life for us without asking you for anything. Not money, not recognition, not help. His dark eyes, Vincent's eyes, burned with righteous fury. She worked 3 jobs to put herself through law school. She built a new practice from nothing. She gave me everything I needed to become the man I am today. Vincent finally found his voice. Then why? Why are you here now? Mother and son exchanged a look that spoke of years of planning, of pain transformed into purpose. Because, Zoe said, rising to her feet with the grace of a queen addressing her court, sometimes the only way to get justice is to take it yourself. She nodded to Connor, who pulled out one final document from his folder. This one was different, official letterhead, legal formatting, signatures and seals. Mom's law practice specializes in corporate fraud investigations now, Connor explained. And 3 months ago, she was hired by a coalition of your former competitors to file a class action lawsuit against Sterling Industries. Vincent's world exploded into fragments. For systematically using shell companies to manipulate and destroy competition, Connor continued with devastating calm. The damages they're seeking? He looked up at Vincent with a smile that was pure vengeance. $500 million. Vincent's legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, the champagne glass slipping from numb fingers to shatter against the marble floor. Happy Thanksgiving, Vincent, Zoe said softly. You're being served. And as Connor handed him the legal papers with hands that trembled not with fear, but with the righteous fury of a son protecting his mother's honor, Vincent Corleone realized that his perfect life had just become a perfect nightmare. The boy he'd never known existed was about to destroy everything he'd ever built. And the woman he'd once loved was going to watch him burn. The legal papers felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds in Vincent's hands. The letterhead was elegant, professional, and absolutely devastating. Cross and Associates, LLC, Corporate Fraud and Justice Recovery. The irony wasn't lost on him that Zoe had rebuilt her father's firm into the exact weapon needed to destroy Vincent's empire. $500 million, Rebecca whispered, her face drained of color. Vincent, that's more than our liquid assets. It's exactly our liquid assets, Connor corrected with the precision of someone who'd done his homework. Plus the value of your art collection, your vacation homes, and about 60% of your stock portfolio. He tilted his head slightly, studying Vincent like a chess master contemplating checkmate. I've been very thorough in my research. Vincent's hands shook as he flipped through page after page of meticulously documented evidence. Shell companies he'd forgotten existed. Financial transactions from decades ago. Testimonies from competitors whose lives he'd systematically destroyed. It was all there, presented with the clinical precision of a surgical strike. Daddy. Emma's small voice cut through the legal nightmare. Why is everyone being scary? The innocent question hit Vincent like a physical blow. His daughters didn't understand that their world was collapsing around them. That their college funds, their trust accounts, their entire future was about to evaporate in legal fees and settlement payments. It's okay, sweetheart, Vincent managed, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't name. We're just having a grown-up conversation. Are you going to jail, Daddy? Sophie asked from behind Rebecca's legs, her 6-year-old mind trying to process the tension she could feel but not comprehend. Vincent felt something break inside his chest. His daughters. His innocent, beautiful daughters who would grow up knowing their father was a criminal. Who would carry the shame of the Corleone name for the rest of their lives. Nobody's going to jail, Zoe said gently, kneeling down to Emma's level. Your daddy just has to answer some questions about his business. That's what lawyers do. We ask questions and make sure everyone follows the rules. The kindness in Zoe's voice toward his children was somehow worse than any legal threat. She could have been cruel, could have poisoned his daughters against him. Instead, she was protecting their innocence even while destroying their father. Connor. Vincent's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Can we speak privately? Connor looked to his mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Of course. Though I should mention that everything I know, she knows. We don't keep secrets from each other. The emphasis on we was a knife between Vincent's ribs. They were a team, a family unit that had been forged in the fires of adversity Vincent had unknowingly created. While he'd been building his empire, they'd been building something stronger. A bond that couldn't be broken by money or power or legal threats. Vincent. Rebecca stood on unsteady legs, clutching their daughter's hands. I think we should call our lawyers. Yes, Vincent agreed hollowly. You should do that. He looked at his wife, his beautiful, innocent wife who'd married him believing he was a legitimate businessman, and felt another piece of his soul die. Take the girls to your sisters. This is going to get complicated. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Will you call me? When you know something. Vincent couldn't promise her anything. Couldn't guarantee that he'd still be a free man by morning, or that they'd still have a home to return to. I'll call, he lied, because sometimes love meant protecting people from the truth. As Rebecca gathered their daughters and hurried toward the door, Emma broke free and ran back to Vincent. She threw her small arms around his legs, her face pressed against his knees. I love you, Daddy, she whispered. Even if you're in trouble. Vincent's vision blurred as he lifted his daughter into his arms one last time, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and trying to memorize the feeling of her trust. I love you too, Princess. More than anything in the world. When the door closed behind his family, the penthouse felt like a tomb. Vincent, Zoe, and Connor stood in the echoing silence, surrounded by the ruins of what had been a perfect life just an hour ago. You could have destroyed me privately, Vincent said finally, his voice raw. Why this? Why bring him here to watch? Because, Connor answered before his mother could speak, I wanted to see the man who taught me everything I need to know about power. About how to win at any cost. About how to destroy people who trust you. Vincent flinched as if struck. I never knew about you. I never knew Zoe was pregnant. Would it have mattered? Connor's question was razor-sharp. Would you have stopped destroying innocent families if you'd known one of them was carrying your child? Vincent opened his mouth to say yes, to claim that he would have been different, better. But the words died in his throat. Because 15 years ago, drunk on power and success, would he really have chosen love over conquest? That's what I thought, Connor said softly, reading Vincent's silence like a book. You want to know what's really ironic? Mom never wanted this. She built her new practice to help other victims of corporate fraud. She never intended to come after you specifically. Then why? Because, Zoe interrupted, her voice heavy with years of buried pain. 3 months ago, Connor asked me who his father was. For 16 years, I told him his father was someone who couldn't be in our lives. Someone who'd hurt our family before Connor was born. But he's 16 now, and he deserved the truth. Vincent felt the walls closing in. So you told him about me. I told him everything, Zoe confirmed. About how we met. About how I thought I was falling in love with a brilliant, ambitious man who shared my dreams of building something meaningful. About how that same man systematically destroyed my family's legacy while he was taking me to dinner and talking about our future together. The accusations hung in the air like poison gas. Vincent remembered those dinners, those conversations about the future. He'd been genuinely falling in love with Zoe Cross even as he was orchestrating the destruction of Cross and Associates. The cognitive dissonance had been staggering, but he'd compartmentalized it, told himself that business was business and love was love. When I found out about Meridian Corporation, Zoe continued, when I realized that the man I thought I loved was the same monster who'd killed my father, I wanted to disappear. To take my unborn child and start over somewhere Vincent Corleone could never find us. But I found out anyway, Connor said, his young voice carrying an old soul's wisdom. I did my own research. I traced the connections, followed the money trails, connected the dots Mom had tried so hard to keep separate. His dark eyes burned with intensity. And I realized something she hadn't considered. Vincent dreaded the answer, but had to ask. What? That maybe the only way to truly protect future families from what you did to ours was to make sure you couldn't do it again, Connor replied. That maybe justice wasn't just about healing old wounds, but about preventing new ones. Vincent felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? Connor pulled out his phone and showed Vincent a series of screenshots. News articles, financial reports, corporate filings. Sterling Industries has acquired 6 companies in the past 2 years. All of them struggling, all of them desperate for the contracts you've offered them. All of them eerily similar to the pattern you used in the 1990s. Vincent's blood turned to ice. The Brennan Group. Coastal Dynamics. Phoenix Rising LLC. Companies he'd targeted for acquisition using the same playbook that had destroyed Cross and Associates. He'd thought he'd evolved, thought his methods had become more sophisticated. But apparently, a tiger couldn't change its stripes. They all have families, Mr. Corleone, Connor continued with devastating calm. The owners, the employees, the investors who trusted them. Hundreds of people whose lives are about to be destroyed by your business model. He leaned forward slightly. Unless someone stops you. Vincent finally understood. This wasn't just about revenge for what he'd done to the Cross family. This was about justice for what he was still doing to others. His son, this brilliant, idealistic teenager he'd never known existed, had appointed himself the instrument of Vincent's karmic retribution. The lawsuit is just the beginning, Zoe said softly. We've also provided evidence to the SEC, the FBI, and the attorneys general of 3 states where your victims are based. By tomorrow morning, Sterling Industries will be facing criminal investigations, civil suits, and regulatory scrutiny that will make the class action look like a traffic ticket. Vincent slumped in his chair, finally grasping the true scope of their plan. You're going to destroy everything. We're going to make sure you can never destroy anyone else, Connor corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Vincent laughed bitterly. You'll take away my company, my money, my reputation. My wife will leave me. My daughters will grow up ashamed of their father's name. How is that different from what I did to your family? The question hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time since they'd arrived, Connor's confidence seemed to waver. He looked to his mother, uncertainty flickering in his dark eyes. Because, Zoe said quietly, we're giving you something I never got. A choice. She pulled out a second document from Connor's folder. This is a settlement agreement. You liquidate Sterling Industries voluntarily, compensate your victims, and agree to never operate another business under any name. In exchange, the criminal charges go away, and you keep enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Vincent stared at the document like it was a poisonous snake. And if I refuse? Then we go to trial, Connor said simply. And when it's over, you'll have nothing left except a prison cell and the knowledge that 2 more families were destroyed because you were too proud to do the right thing. Vincent looked from his son to the woman he'd once loved, feeling the weight of 15 years of choices crushing down on him. He'd built an empire on the graves of his competitors' dreams. He'd justified every ruthless decision as necessary for success. He'd told himself that business was war and casualties were inevitable. But sitting in his empty penthouse, surrounded by the ruins of his perfect life, Vincent finally understood what he'd really built. A house of cards that had always been destined to fall. The only question now was whether he'd take everyone else down with him. Vincent's hands trembled as he set down the settlement agreement, the legal words swimming before his eyes like a death sentence written in Time's New Roman. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of 15 years of buried secrets and the promise of destruction yet to come. There's something else you need to know, Connor said quietly, his teenage certainty faltering for the first time since they'd arrived. He looked to his mother with something that might have been uncertainty. Something we didn't plan to tell you tonight. Zoe's composed mask cracked slightly. Connor, we discussed. He has a right to know, Connor interrupted, his voice carrying a pain that made him sound far older than 16. Especially if we're asking him to make this choice. Vincent felt his heart stop. Know what? Connor reached into his backpack and pulled out a manila envelope, this one worn with age and handling. His hands shook slightly as he opened it, revealing a collection of photographs, medical records, and handwritten letters. Mom didn't just disappear after she found out about Meridian Corporation, Connor began, his voice barely above a whisper. She tried to find you first. She wanted to tell you about me, wanted to give you a chance to be my father. The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. What do you mean? Zoe closed her eyes, her composure finally cracking. I was 6 months pregnant. Scared, alone, my family's business destroyed, but I still believed. She opened her eyes, and Vincent saw tears threatening to spill. I still believed the man I'd fallen in love with might want to know about his child. Connor pulled out a photograph. A young woman with a swollen belly, standing outside a familiar office building. Vincent recognized it immediately. Sterling Industries' original headquarters, the modest downtown building where he'd started his empire. I came to your office, Zoe continued, her voice thick with emotion. I waited for 3 hours because your secretary said you were in important meetings. When you finally agreed to see me, I was so nervous I could barely speak. Vincent's memory stirred, catching fragments of a day he'd tried to forget. A young woman, visibly pregnant, claiming to have personal business to discuss. He'd been in the middle of the Brennan Group acquisition, distracted by board meetings and legal strategies. You don't remember, do you? Connor asked, studying Vincent's face. You gave her exactly 5 minutes. The memory crashed over Vincent like a tide of ice water. The pregnant woman who'd seemed familiar, but out of place in his sterile office. Who'd started to say something about a baby, about the networking events where they'd met, about something important she needed to tell him. I cut you off, Vincent whispered, the horror of realization washing over him. I said I didn't have time for paternity scams. You said, Zoe's voice was steady but her hands were shaking, that if I was looking for a payout, I'd picked the wrong mark. That you had lawyers who specialized in dealing with women like me. That if I ever contacted you again, you'd have me arrested for harassment. Connor pulled out a letter, handwritten on legal stationery. Mom wrote to you 3 more times. Registered mail, requiring signature. She tried to explain who she was, why she needed to speak with you, what you'd meant to each other. Vincent stared at the letters, unopened in their official envelopes. I had Margaret screen my mail. She would have followed your standing orders about nuisance correspondence, Connor finished. Return to sender, no exceptions. He set the letters on the coffee table between them like evidence in a trial. Mom kept the returned letters. She kept everything. Vincent felt like he was drowning in his own arrogance. His own paranoia about gold diggers and extortion attempts had blinded him to the truth. He'd been so consumed with protecting his growing empire that he'd thrown away his only chance at having a real family. After the 3rd letter came back, Zoe continued, I realized you weren't just unwilling to listen. You were hostile to the very idea that I existed. So I made a choice. She could have taken you to court, Connor added. Could have forced paternity tests, demanded child support, made your life complicated. Instead, she decided to protect me from a father who'd already made it clear we weren't wanted. Vincent's throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. Zoe, I'm so sorry. If I'd known, if I'd just listened. But you didn't listen, Connor interrupted, his voice hard again. And that choice tells us everything we need to know about who Vincent Corleone really is. A man who destroys first and asks questions later. A man who sees other people as either useful or threatening, never just human. The accuracy of the assessment was devastating because Vincent couldn't deny it. Even now, 15 years later, his first instinct upon seeing Connor hadn't been wonder or joy at discovering he had a son. It had been calculation, threat assessment, damage control. There's more, Connor said quietly, pulling out a thick medical file. Mom didn't just raise me alone. She raised me sick. Vincent's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Zoe took a shaky breath. Connor was born with a congenital heart defect. He needed surgery at 6 months, again at 3 years, and again at 8. Each operation cost tens of thousands of dollars. I had no insurance, no family support, no financial resources. Connor opened the medical file, revealing page after page of bills, treatment records, surgical notes. Mom worked 3 jobs and went to law school at night, but it still wasn't enough. We lost our apartment twice. I spent my 7th birthday in a homeless shelter because Mom had to choose between rent money and my cardiac medication. Vincent felt like he was being flayed alive. While he'd been building his fortune, his son had been fighting for his life. While he'd been buying art collections and vacation homes, his own child had been homeless. The irony, Connor continued with devastating calm, is that my medical bills cost almost exactly what Cross and Associates lost when Meridian Corporation went bankrupt. If you'd just honored that original contract, if you'd paid my grandfather's company what you owed, we would have had health insurance. I would have gotten proper treatment. Mom wouldn't have had to sacrifice everything. Vincent stared at the medical records, each page a testament to suffering he'd unknowingly caused. His son's small hands in hospital beds. His brilliant boy fighting for breath while Vincent bought his third Ferrari. I'm alive, Connor said simply. The surgeries worked, obviously. But there were complications. Developmental delays from the medications. Years of physical therapy. Times when Mom wasn't sure. His voice cracked slightly. Times when she wasn't sure I'd make it to my next birthday. Vincent wanted to die. Wanted to sink through the marble floor and disappear into the earth rather than face the magnitude of what his choices had cost. His son had nearly died because Vincent Corleone was too arrogant to listen to the mother of his child. Why are you telling me this? Vincent whispered. Mother and son exchanged another of their meaningful looks. It was Zoe who answered. Because we want you to understand what justice really looks like, she said softly. You took away my father's life work, my family's security, my son's health, and my faith in humanity. But despite all of that, despite having every reason to hate you, I'm still offering you a choice I never got. Vincent looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, Connor said, that everything we've shown you tonight, the lawsuit, the criminal referrals, the evidence, it all disappears if you sign that settlement agreement. Vincent stared at them in confusion. I don't understand. Mom doesn't want revenge, Connor explained. She wants justice. There's a difference. Revenge would be destroying you completely, the way you destroyed us. Justice is giving you the chance to make amends. Zoe leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. Sign the settlement, Vincent. Liquidate Sterling Industries voluntarily. Use the money to compensate every family you've destroyed. Spend the rest of your life making up for the damage you've caused. She paused, her voice catching slightly. Do that, and Connor gets something he's wanted his whole life. What? Vincent asked, though he was afraid of the answer. Connor's voice was barely a whisper. A father who chose to be better than he had to be. The words hit Vincent like a revelation and a condemnation all at once. They weren't just offering him a way out of legal troubles. They were offering him a chance at redemption. A chance to be the father he should have been, the man he could still become. But the cost was everything he'd spent his life building. And if I refuse? Vincent asked, though he dreaded the answer. Then we go to war, Connor replied simply. And when it's over, you'll have lost everything anyway. The only difference is that you'll have lost your soul too. Vincent stared at the settlement papers, at the medical records, at the faces of the woman he'd once loved and the son he'd never known. Outside the windows, the lights of Manhattan twinkled like stars, and somewhere in that vast city, his wife was explaining to their daughters that Daddy might not be coming home. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built, everything he'd thought mattered hung in the balance of a single decision. The question wasn't whether Vincent Corleone would lose his empire. The question was whether he'd find his soul in time to save it. Asterisk friends, I can feel your hearts racing through the screen. This story is just getting started. And I need to know, are you ready for the emotional roller coaster that's coming? Drop a comment telling me, do you think Vincent will choose power or redemption? And if you're loving this journey as much as I am, smash that subscribe button because what happens next will blow your mind. Asterisk. Vincent stared at the settlement papers for what felt like an eternity, the weight of 16 years crushing down on his shoulders like a physical force. The numbers swam before his eyes. $500 million, his life's work, his legacy, his children's future. All of it reduced to a signature on a legal document. I need time, he said finally, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and grief. Connor's expression hardened. Time for what? To figure out how to destroy the evidence? To discredit Mom somehow? To make this all disappear with money and lawyers? Connor, Zoe warned softly, but her son's righteous fury was building like a storm. No, Mom. I'm tired of being patient with him. Connor stood up, his teenage frame vibrating with emotion. Do you know what I used to dream about when I was 8 years old and recovering from heart surgery? I used to imagine my father walking through that hospital door. I'd picture him taking one look at me hooked up to all those machines and deciding that nothing in the world mattered more than making sure I was okay. Vincent felt each word like a knife between his ribs. Instead, Connor continued, his voice breaking slightly, My father was probably celebrating another business acquisition. Probably toasting another victory while his son was fighting for his life in a charity ward. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Vincent wanted to defend himself, to explain that he hadn't known, that he would have been different if he'd understood. But the words died in his throat because deep down, he wasn't sure they were true. You want time? Connor laughed bitterly. You've had 16 years of time. Time to be a father. Time to be better than the monster who destroyed our family. Time to prove that somewhere inside Vincent Corleone was a man worth knowing. His dark eyes, Vincent's eyes, burned with disappointment. But here we are, and you're still calculating. Still looking for angles. Still trying to figure out how to win instead of how to be human. Vincent's phone buzzed against the coffee table, the screen lighting up with Rebecca's number. He could see her text through the notification. Girls are asking when daddy's coming home. What should I tell them? The message was a reminder of everything he stood to lose. Emma and Sophie, innocent and trusting, who still believed their father was a hero. Rebecca, who'd married him believing he was an honorable man. The life he'd built, imperfect but real, hanging by a thread. I won't sign, Vincent said quietly, the words falling from his lips like stones into still water. Zoe's face went pale. Vincent, I won't sign, he repeated louder now, his voice gaining strength from desperation. You want to destroy me? Fine, but I won't hand you the knife. I've built something here, something that matters. I have employees, investors, families who depend on Sterling Industries. I have daughters who deserve better than growing up as the children of a man who gave up everything he'd worked for. Connor stared at him in disbelief. You're seriously going to choose your money over your soul? I'm choosing to fight for what's mine, Vincent snapped, his old arrogance flaring like a dying flame. You think you can walk into my home with your self-righteous indignation and your carefully orchestrated guilt trip, and I'll just roll over? You think 16 years of absence gives you the right to judge the choices I made to build this empire? Those choices destroyed innocent people. Connor shot back. Those choices created jobs. They built companies. They generated wealth that benefits thousands of people. Vincent was on his feet now, pacing like a caged animal. Yes, some companies failed. Yes, some people got hurt. But that's business, Connor. That's how the world works. The strong survive and the weak fall away. Listen to yourself, Zoe whispered, horror clear in her voice. You're talking about my father. About families torn apart. About children who went hungry because you decided their parents' businesses weren't worth preserving. And I'm talking about my children. Vincent roared. About Emma and Sophie who didn't choose any of this. About Rebecca who trusted me to protect our family. You want me to sacrifice their future for crimes I committed before they were even born. The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent could hear his own ragged breathing, could feel the weight of Zoe's disappointed stare and Connor's look of pure disgust. So that's it then, Connor said quietly. That's who Vincent Corleone really is. A man who'd rather destroy his own son than admit he was wrong. You're not my son, Vincent said, the words escaping before he could stop them. You're a stranger who shares my DNA. You're a weapon Zoe created to tear down everything I've built. Connor recoiled as if he'd been slapped. For a moment, his teenage composure cracked completely, and Vincent saw the little boy who'd dreamed of his father's love looking back at him with heartbreak in his eyes. Connor! Zoe moved to her son's side, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. He doesn't mean that. Yes, he does, Connor whispered, tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. And now I know why you never wanted him in our lives. You knew he'd choose money over everything else. Even over me. Vincent felt something die inside his chest as he watched his son, his brilliant, passionate, idealistic son, crumble under the weight of rejection. But his pride, his fear, his desperate need to protect what remained of his life wouldn't let him take the words back. Get out, Vincent said quietly. Take your lawsuit, take your evidence, take whatever revenge you think you deserve. But get out of my home. Zoe gathered the papers with shaking hands, her composure finally shattered. Vincent, please. This isn't what I wanted. I never wanted to hurt you like this. But you did, Vincent replied coldly. You brought him here to watch me fall. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in turning my own son against me, before I even had a chance to know him. Connor wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his teenage vulnerability disappearing behind a mask of cold determination. You had a chance, Mr. Corleone. You had 16 years of chances. And tonight, you had one last opportunity to be the father I needed you to be. He met Vincent's eyes with steady resolve. But you chose yourself instead. Just like you always do. As they moved toward the door, Vincent felt panic clawing at his chest. This was really happening. They were really going to destroy him. By tomorrow morning, his empire would be under assault from every direction. The FBI, the SEC, the media, they'd all descend like vultures, picking apart everything he'd built. And for what? For pride? For the desperate hope that somehow he could win a war against his own conscience? Wait, Vincent called out, his voice cracking. They stopped at the door, but didn't turn around. If I were to reconsider. It's too late, Connor said without looking back. The settlement offer expires at midnight. After that, we go to war. He finally turned, and Vincent saw nothing but cold resolve in his son's eyes. And when it's over, the only difference will be that you'll have lost everything and gained nothing. No redemption. No second chances. No son who might have learned to forgive you. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like the closing of a coffin lid. Vincent stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the symbols of his success. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the priceless art collection that would soon be liquidated to pay legal fees. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from Rebecca, from his lawyers, from board members who'd gotten wind of the impending legal storm. He ignored them all. Instead, he walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and stared out at the city he'd conquered. Manhattan spread out before him like a glittering promise, but all Vincent could see were the ghosts of his victims. The families he'd destroyed, the dreams he'd crushed, the son he'd rejected. At 11:47 p.m., Vincent's phone rang. Rebecca's number. Vincent. Her voice was small, frightened. The girls are having nightmares. They keep asking if you're coming home. I don't know what to tell them. Vincent closed his eyes, seeing Emma's trusting face, Sophie's innocent smile. His daughters who still believed their daddy was a hero. Tell them. Vincent's voice broke completely. Tell them Daddy loves them. Tell them everything's going to be okay. Is it? Rebecca whispered. Is everything going to be okay? Vincent looked at the settlement papers on his coffee table, then at the clock on his phone. 11:51. 9 minutes. 9 minutes to choose between the empire he'd built on the graves of other people's dreams and the son he'd never known he wanted. 9 minutes to decide whether Vincent Corleone would die a rich man or live as a redeemed one. I don't know, he told his wife, his voice barely audible. I honestly don't know. The clock ticked toward midnight, and with each passing second, Vincent felt pieces of his soul slipping away like sand through his fingers. He'd finally gotten everything he'd ever wanted, and it was about to cost him everything he'd never known he needed. Vincent stood motionless at the window, watching the city pulse with life 15 floors below. The settlement papers lay on the coffee table behind him like a loaded gun, while his phone displayed 11:53 p.m. in harsh digital numbers. 7 minutes. 7 minutes to choose between everything he'd built and everything he'd lost. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of his choices. Emma's laughter echoed from empty rooms. Connor's disappointed eyes stared back at him from the dark glass. Zoe's voice whispered accusations that sounded like prayers for his salvation. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Connor's number, he realized. I know you probably won't read this, but I wanted you to know that I didn't want it to end like this. I spent my whole life imagining what it would be like to meet my father. In my dreams, you were never perfect. Mom made sure I understood that people make mistakes. But I always hoped you'd be brave enough to try to be better. I'm sorry we were both disappointed tonight. Your son. Vincent's hands shook as he read the message again, each word cutting deeper than legal documents or financial threats. Your son. Not Connor Parker. Not the weapon Zoe had supposedly created to destroy him, but simply his son who'd wanted nothing more than a father brave enough to try. 11:55. Vincent's mind raced through calculations he'd perfected over decades of ruthless business decisions. Sterling Industries was worth approximately $12 billion on paper. The settlement would cost him $500 million, plus the voluntary liquidation of questionable assets. He'd survive financially, even thrive by most people's standards. His daughter's futures would be secure, his wife's lifestyle maintained. But his empire would be gone. His reputation would be in ruins. The business world that had once feared and respected Vincent Corleone would know he'd been brought down by his own forgotten victims. 11:56. His phone rang. Rebecca again. Vincent, the news is already picking up the story. There are reporters outside my sister's house. Emma saw them through the window and asked if Daddy was a bad man like the ones on TV. Rebecca's voice was steady, but Vincent could hear the fear underneath. I told her no, but Vincent, I need to know. Are you the man they're going to say you are? Vincent closed his eyes, remembering a conversation from years ago. Rebecca, then his fiancée, asking about his business practices. He deflected with charm and expensive gifts, never quite lying, but never telling the whole truth either. She'd trusted him, married him, built a life with him based on carefully constructed half-truths. Yes, Vincent said quietly. I think I am. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Oh, Rebecca whispered. Oh, Vincent. But I don't have to keep being him, Vincent continued, the words coming from some deep place he'd forgotten existed. I can choose to be different. Better. If it's not too late. What does that mean? Vincent looked at the clock. 11:57. It means I love you and the girls more than I love winning, Vincent said, surprised by the truth in his own voice. It means some things are more important than being right. Vincent, what are you saying? 11:58. Vincent hung up and grabbed the settlement papers, his hands moving with sudden urgency. He signed his name with bold strokes across the bottom of each page, the ink sealing his empire's fate and perhaps salvaging his soul. 11:59. Vincent took a photo of the signed documents and texted it to Connor's number with a simple message. I choose you. The clock struck midnight as Vincent sent the message, the chime of his antique grandfather clock marking not just the end of Thanksgiving, but the end of everything Vincent Corleone had thought mattered. His phone rang immediately. Zoe's voice was breathless, disbelieving. Vincent, did you just send what I think you sent? I signed it, Vincent said simply. All of it. The settlement, the voluntary liquidation, the compensation fund. It's done. Silence stretched across the connection. Why? Zoe asked quietly. Vincent walked back to the window, but instead of seeing a conquered city, he saw a possibility. Because Connor was right. I spent 16 years being the man who destroyed your family. Maybe I can spend the next 16 being the man who tries to repair what he broke. Vincent, is he there? Connor, is he listening? Another pause. Then Connor's voice, cautious and young. I'm here. I'm sorry, Vincent said, the words he should have spoken decades ago finally finding their way out. I'm sorry for destroying your grandfather's company. I'm sorry for dismissing your mother when she was carrying you. I'm sorry for the medical bills, for the homeless shelters, for every night you went hungry because of choices I made. His voice cracked. Most of all, I'm sorry for tonight. For choosing money over the son I've wanted my whole life without even knowing it. Silence. Then the sound of quiet crying. Connor. Vincent's heart hammered against his ribs. I'm here, Connor managed. I spent so long being angry at you. I don't know how to stop. You don't have to stop being angry, Vincent replied. You have every right to hate me. But maybe we could try being angry at me together. Maybe you could teach me how to be the father you deserved. I don't know how to do that either. Vincent smiled through his tears. Then maybe we can figure it out together. A longer pause. When Connor spoke again, his voice was steadier. The settlement, it's going to destroy Sterling Industries. Good, Vincent said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Sterling Industries was built on other people's pain. Let it burn. We'll build something better from the ashes. If you'll have me, Vincent said carefully. I know I don't deserve it. I know I haven't earned the right to be part of your life. But if you're willing to let me try. I want to, Connor admitted. I've wanted to my whole life. But I'm scared. Of what? That you'll change your mind. That when the lawyers and the reporters start circling, you'll decide your reputation matters more than us. Vincent felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For the first time in his adult life, the idea of losing everything didn't terrify him. The idea of losing his son did. Connor, Vincent said firmly, I want you to listen to me very carefully. In about 12 hours, the business world is going to tear me apart. They're going to call me a fraud, a criminal, a failure. They're going to say Vincent Corleone lost everything because he was too weak to fight back. He paused, letting the truth settle in his own heart. And they'll be wrong. I'm not losing everything. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what actually matters. And what's that? You, Vincent said simply. You and your mother. The chance to know who my son really is. The opportunity to prove that it's never too late to become the man you should have been all along. When Connor spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. There's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. Vincent smiled. His son was perceptive, brilliant, seeing through Vincent's defenses the way Zoe once had. Rebecca and the girls, Vincent admitted. This is going to be hard on them. The media attention, the financial changes, the revelation that their father isn't the man they thought he was. He took a deep breath. They're going to need time to process everything. And you're going to need time to decide if you really want me in your life, or if you were just testing whether I was capable of doing the right thing. I wasn't testing you, Connor said quickly. I mean, maybe at first, but tonight I just wanted to know if my father was someone worth knowing. And now you know I'm not, Vincent replied. But maybe I could become someone worth knowing. If you're willing to be patient with me while I figure out how. Another long pause. Then Zoe's voice came back on the line. Vincent, there's something Connor hasn't told you. Something we thought you should know before you make any decisions about the future. Vincent's heart clenched. What? The heart condition, Zoe said softly. Connor's not completely healed. He needs another surgery, probably within the next 2 years. It's experimental, expensive, and the recovery will be long and difficult. Vincent felt the world tilt. Will he be okay? With proper treatment? Yes. He'll be fine. But Vincent, the reason we're telling you is because we want you to understand what being Connor's father really means. Not just the good parts, the pride in his achievements, the joy of getting to know him. But the scary parts too. The medical appointments, the uncertainty, the fear that keeps you awake at night. Vincent didn't hesitate. When's the next appointment? Who's his cardiologist? What kind of timeline are we looking at? Vincent, when's the next appointment? Vincent repeated firmly. Because if I'm going to be his father, I'm going to be his father. All of it. The fear, the medical bills, the sleepless nights. All of it. That's what fathers do, right? They show up. Silence. Then Connor's voice, younger and more vulnerable than Vincent had heard all night. You'd really want to do that? Even knowing it might be scary and expensive and hard. Connor, Vincent said, his voice steady with newfound certainty. I've spent my entire life being afraid of the wrong things. I was afraid of being poor, so I destroyed innocent families to get rich. I was afraid of being weak, so I crushed anyone who threatened me. I was afraid of being ordinary, so I became a monster. He paused, feeling the truth of his next words in his bones. But the only thing that really scares me now is the thought of missing one more day of being your father. When Connor started crying, really crying, not the controlled emotions of earlier, but the messy, overwhelming sobs of a teenager who'd finally heard the words he'd needed his whole life, Vincent felt his own careful composure crack completely. Can I come over? Vincent asked through his own tears. I know it's late, I know you probably need time to process, but I've missed 16 years of tucking you in at night, and can I come over? Yes, Connor managed between sobs. Yes, I want you to come over. I want you to meet my mom properly, not as adversaries, but as the people who love me most. I want to show you my room, my school projects, my debate team trophies. I want you to see the life we built without you so you can understand what we're offering to share. Vincent was already moving toward the door, grabbing his keys and wallet with the urgency of a man who'd finally remembered what home felt like. I'm on my way, he said. And Connor, thank you. For what? For being brave enough to save me from myself. For being the man I never was but always should have been. For giving me a chance to learn how to love something more than winning. As Vincent rushed toward the elevator, leaving behind the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of his empty penthouse, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. Not hope for victory or profit or dominance over his enemies. Hope for redemption. Hope for family. Hope that it was never too late to choose love over fear. Hope that Vincent Corleone's story wasn't ending tonight, but finally, truly beginning. Vincent's hands trembled as he stood outside the modest brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. The address Zoe had texted him an hour earlier. The building was everything his Manhattan penthouse wasn't. Warm, lived in, surrounded by actual neighbors instead of empty luxury. Through the lit windows on the second floor, he could see movement, shadows of the family he'd never known existed. His phone buzzed with messages from his lawyers, board members, and Rebecca, all demanding explanations for the bombshell settlement that would hit the news cycle within hours. Vincent turned off his phone without reading them. For the first time in his adult life, the business world would have to wait. The door opened before he could knock. Connor stood there in pajama pants and a t-shirt, his eyes red from crying, but his posture straight with newfound confidence. "Hi," Connor said simply. "Hi," Vincent replied, feeling absurdly nervous. "Thank you for letting me come." "Thank you for coming." They stood there for a moment, father and son, separated by 16 years of absence and united by the fragile hope of what they might become. "Connor, is that your father?" Zoe's voice drifted from inside, and Vincent's heart clenched at hearing himself referred to that way for the first time. "Yeah, Mom. It's him." Vincent followed Connor up a narrow staircase lined with photographs. Connor as a baby in the hospital, Connor taking his first steps, Connor graduating from middle school. A life documented in loving detail, every milestone captured except for the man who should have been there to witness them. Zoe stood in the doorway of a cozy living room, having changed from her elegant coat into jeans and a sweater. Without makeup and formal clothes, she looked younger, more like the woman Vincent had fallen in love with 20 years ago. "Vincent," she said softly. "Come in." The apartment was small but filled with life. Books everywhere, Connor's debate team trophies on the mantle, medical equipment tucked discreetly in a corner. This was what a real home looked like, not the sterile perfection of Vincent's penthouse, but the comfortable chaos of people who actually lived together. "I brought something," Vincent said, pulling out a thick manila envelope. "The signed settlement agreement, plus some additional documents I thought you should see." Zoe frowned. "Additional documents?" Vincent set the envelope on the coffee table with hands that shook slightly. "I've transferred $10 million into a medical trust fund for Connor. For his surgery, future treatments, anything he might need. I've also established a $20 million foundation in your father's name to provide support for small businesses targeted by predatory practices." Connor stared at him in shock. "You did that tonight?" "I made some calls," Vincent admitted. "Turns out when you're liquidating a $12 billion empire, you have a lot of liquid assets to work with." He looked directly at his son. "I can't undo 16 years of absence, but I can make sure you never have to worry about medical bills again." "Vincent," Zoe's voice was thick with emotion. That's incredibly generous, but you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Vincent interrupted gently. "I absolutely do. Connor nearly died because I was too arrogant to listen when you tried to tell me about him. I've been rich while my son struggled to breathe. I've been successful while my son's mother worked 3 jobs to keep him alive." He met Zoe's eyes directly. "I can't fix the past, but I can sure as hell secure his future." Connor sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Vincent replied. "But there is something I need to tell you both. Something that happened after you left tonight." He pulled out his phone and showed them a series of screenshots, news articles that had gone live in the past hour. "Sterling Industries CEO voluntarily settles fraud allegations," Zoe read aloud. "Vincent Corleone admits wrongdoing, agrees to compensate victims." "The story's everywhere," Vincent said. CNN, Wall Street Journal, Forbes. "By tomorrow morning, every business publication in the world will know that Vincent Corleone chose accountability over fighting." He smiled grimly. "My reputation is officially dead." Connor looked up sharply. "Are you okay with that?" Vincent considered the question seriously. "You know what's funny? I spent my whole life building a reputation as a man who never lost, who never backed down, who crushed anyone who threatened him. And tonight, I willingly destroyed that reputation to save something more important." He looked at Connor with wonder. "I should be devastated. Instead, I feel more proud of myself than I have in 20 years. "There's something else," Zoe said, scrolling through the news coverage on her own phone. "Look at this." She showed them an article from the business ethics blog that had broken the story first. The headline read, "Redemption or Calculation? Why Vincent Corleone's Sudden Conscience Matters." Vincent read aloud. "Whether Corleone's settlement represents genuine remorse or damage control, his actions tonight will have far-reaching implications for corporate accountability. For the first time in recent memory, a billionaire CEO has chosen transparency over litigation, compensation over denial." He looked up. "They're calling it either the most expensive public relations move in history or the most significant moment of corporate redemption in decades. Which one do you think it is?" Connor asked quietly. Vincent met his son's eyes. "Ask me in a year. If I'm still showing up for medical appointments and still answering your calls when the novelty wears off, then you'll have your answer." Connor nodded slowly. "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the night's revelations settling around them like dust after an earthquake. Finally, Connor spoke. There's something I need to tell you too. Something Mom doesn't know. Zoe frowned. Connor? Connor reached into his backpack and pulled out another folder, this one smaller and more personal. I didn't just research Sterling Industries for school. I've been researching you, Vincent Corleone the person, for months. Ever since Mom told me who my father was. Vincent felt a familiar chill. What did you find? Connor opened the folder to reveal a collection of photographs, articles, and handwritten notes. I found out that Vincent Corleone established a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids at 3 universities. I found out that Vincent Corleone donated anonymously to children's hospitals in 5 states. I found out that Vincent Corleone quietly paid for the medical treatment of his assistant's husband when he had cancer. Vincent stared at the evidence of kindnesses he'd tried to keep secret. How did you? I'm very good at research, Connor replied with a small smile. And I wanted to understand who my father really was. Not just the corporate raider who destroyed businesses, but the whole person. He looked up with eyes that were no longer cold or calculating. I found out that Vincent Corleone was capable of great cruelty and great kindness, sometimes in the same week. That he was a man who lost his way but never completely lost his heart. Zoe stared at her son in amazement. You've known this for months? I've known that my father was complicated, Connor admitted. What I didn't know was whether he was brave enough to choose who he wanted to be instead of who he thought he had to be. He looked directly at Vincent. Tonight, you answered that question. Vincent felt tears threatening again. So this was all a test? No, Connor said firmly. This was justice. Real justice. The kind that gives people a chance to be better instead of just punishing them for being worse. He paused. But it was also hope. Hope that maybe the man who was kind enough to save other people's children might be strong enough to save his own son. Vincent couldn't speak. Couldn't process the magnitude of what Connor was saying. His son, his brilliant, compassionate, incredible son, had seen past the monster to the man Vincent might become. There's one more thing, Connor said softly. Something I've been wanting to ask you all night, but I was too scared. What? Connor's voice became very small, very young. When you have your surgery consultation with me next month, would you hold my hand? I know I'm 16 and I'm supposed to be tough, but I get scared in hospitals, and I always wished. He trailed off, embarrassed. Vincent moved from his chair to sit beside Connor on the couch, slowly reaching out to take his son's hand. Connor, I would be honored to hold your hand. During consultations, during surgery, during recovery, whenever you need me to be there, I'll be there. Even if it's scary? Especially if it's scary, Vincent replied. That's what fathers do. They show up for the scary parts. Connor squeezed Vincent's hand tightly. I love you, he whispered. I know I shouldn't yet, I know you haven't earned it, but I've loved the idea of you my whole life, and now that you're here. I love you too, Vincent replied, his voice breaking completely. I've loved you since the moment I realized you existed. I just didn't know how to stop being afraid long enough to show it. Zoe watched them with tears streaming down her face. Vincent, there's something I need to say too. Vincent looked up, still holding Connor's hand. I never wanted revenge, Zoe said softly. I wanted justice, yes, but more than that, I wanted Connor to know who his father really was. Not the perfect man he might have imagined, not the monster the business world feared, but the real person underneath all of that. She wiped her eyes. I wanted him to have the chance to love you or hate you based on truth instead of fantasy. And? Vincent asked, terrified of the answer. Zoe smiled through her tears. And I think Connor got his answer tonight. Vincent felt something inside his chest that he'd thought was dead forever. The feeling of being truly, completely loved. Not for his money or his power or his success, but for the man he was struggling to become. What happens now? Connor asked. I mean, practically speaking. You live in Manhattan, we live in Brooklyn. You have Rebecca and the girls, we have our life here. How do we be a family? Vincent considered the question seriously. We figure it out together. Slowly, carefully, with lots of mistakes and lots of patience. I'll need to have some hard conversations with Rebecca and the girls about who I really am and who you are. You'll need to decide how much of me you want in your life, and how fast you want to let me in. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Vincent said, squeezing Connor's hand, I show up. I come to your debate team meetings. I learn about your interests. I sit in waiting rooms during medical appointments. I prove that when I say I want to be your father, I mean it. Connor nodded slowly. I'd like that. But Vincent. Yeah. Don't try to buy my love with expensive gifts or fancy trips. I don't need a rich father. I need a real one. Vincent laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Deal. Though I reserve the right to embarrass you at debate tournaments by cheering too loudly. That's what real fathers do, Connor agreed with a grin. As the three of them sat together in that small Brooklyn living room, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on love instead of conquest, Vincent realized something profound. He'd spent his entire adult life accumulating power, wealth, and influence. He'd built an empire that commanded fear and respect across the business world. But sitting here, holding his son's hand while the woman he'd once loved smiled at them both with tears of joy, Vincent finally understood what victory actually looked like. It wasn't about crushing your enemies or accumulating more wealth than your competitors. It was about having people who loved you enough to give you a second chance. It was about being brave enough to deserve that chance. And it was about choosing, every single day, to be the man your family needed instead of the man your ego wanted to be. For the first time in his life, Vincent Corleone felt like a winner. 6 months later, Vincent sat in the waiting room of Mount Sinai Hospital, his hands clasped tightly together as he watched the surgical board that would tell him when Connor's procedure was complete. Beside him, Zoe read a magazine with forced calm, though Vincent could see the worry in the tension of her shoulders. Mr. and Mrs. Corleone? They both looked up, then shared a rueful smile. The nurse had been making that assumption all morning, and neither had bothered to correct her. There were more important things to worry about than relationship labels. The surgery is going beautifully, the nurse continued. Dr. Martinez says Connor is responding perfectly to the procedure. About 2 more hours. Vincent exhaled slowly, feeling some of the tension leave his chest. Thank you. As the nurse walked away, Zoe reached over and squeezed Vincent's hand. He's going to be fine. I know, Vincent replied, squeezing back. It's just, this is the first time I've ever been scared about someone I love. It was true. 6 months of being Connor's father had taught Vincent what real fear felt like. Not the calculated risk assessment of business deals, but the raw terror of loving someone whose well-being was beyond his control. How are you doing with everything else? Zoe asked quietly. Vincent considered the question. 6 months ago, he'd been worth $12 billion and controlled a business empire that spanned 3 continents. Today, he lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, worked as a consultant for the business ethics foundation he'd established, and spent his evenings helping Connor with homework and learning to cook actual meals instead of ordering from expensive restaurants. I've never been happier, Vincent said, surprised by how true it was. Poorer, humbler, completely irrelevant in the business world, but happier than I ever imagined possible. The liquidation of Sterling Industries had been as brutal as expected. Vincent's former board members had tried to fight the settlement, his investors had sued for breach of fiduciary duty, and the media had dissected every aspect of his fall from grace with gleeful precision. But through it all, Connor had been there, offering awkward teenage comfort when the stress overwhelmed Vincent, celebrating small victories when another victim family received their compensation check, standing beside his father as they toured the wreckage of an empire built on other people's pain. Rebecca and the girls? Zoe asked carefully. Vincent smiled, though it still carried a hint of sadness. Good, actually. Better than I expected. The divorce was finalized last month, but she's been surprisingly gracious about everything. She says she'd rather have an honest ex-husband than a dishonest current one. The separation had been painful but necessary. Rebecca deserved a partner who could give her the life she'd signed up for, not a reformed corporate criminal trying to figure out how to be a decent human being. They'd worked out a custody arrangement that prioritized the girl's stability while allowing Vincent to maintain his relationship with them. And Emma and Sophie are adjusting? Better than I am, Vincent admitted. Kids are resilient. They're more interested in the fact that their daddy has more time for soccer games than they are in the financial details. Though Emma did ask if we were poor now, and when I said compared to before, yes, she said good, because rich people on TV are usually mean. Zoe laughed softly. Smart girl. She gets that from her mother, Vincent said. Both of them do. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the ebb and flow of hospital life around them. 6 months ago, Vincent couldn't have imagined finding peace in a place like this. A place where money and power meant nothing, where the only currency that mattered was love and hope. Vincent. Connor's voice came from behind them. They turned to see Connor approaching in a wheelchair, pushed by a smiling nurse. He was pale and tired, but his eyes were bright and alert. "Hey," Vincent said, dropping to one knee beside the wheelchair. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone rearranged my chest cavity with power tools," Connor replied with a weak grin. "But Dr. Martinez says everything went perfectly. The new valve is working great, and I should be back to normal activities within 6 weeks." Vincent felt tears prick his eyes. "That's amazing, kiddo. And the best part," Connor continued, reaching out to take Vincent's hand, "is that this should be the last surgery. Dr. Martinez thinks I'll be able to live a completely normal life now. College, career, maybe even kids someday. All because you're incredibly brave and strong," Vincent interrupted firmly. "This has nothing to do with me." "It has everything to do with you," Connor corrected. "The experimental procedure, the best surgeon in the country, the private room, none of that would have been possible without the medical trust you set up." He squeezed Vincent's hand tightly. "You saved my life." Vincent shook his head. "You saved mine first." As they made their way to Connor's recovery room, Vincent reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The Connor Cross Foundation had disbursed over $50 million to small businesses targeted by predatory practices. Vincent's testimony had led to criminal charges against 3 other corporate executives who'd used similar tactics. The business ethics consulting firm he'd established was helping draft legislation to prevent the kind of systematic fraud that had built his original empire. But more importantly, Vincent had learned what it meant to be a father. Not the distant, financially supportive figure he'd been to Emma and Sophie in their early years, but a real parent who showed up for school plays and homework help and middle-of-the-night anxiety attacks about medical procedures. Knock knock, a familiar voice called from the doorway. Vincent turned to see Rebecca entering with Emma and Sophie, their arms full of get-well cards and a teddy bear wearing a hospital gown. "Uncle Connor," Emma squealed, rushing toward the bed. "We brought you presents." "Emma, careful," Rebecca cautioned, but Connor was already grinning and making space for both girls to climb carefully onto the bed. Vincent watched with amazement as his 2 families, the one he'd built and the one he'd found, merged seamlessly around Connor's hospital bed. Rebecca had insisted on being part of Connor's surgery support team, declaring that anyone important to Vincent and the girls was important to her. The girls had adopted Connor as their big brother with the casual acceptance of children who saw love as additive rather than competitive. "How's our patient?" Rebecca asked Vincent quietly. "Perfect," Vincent replied. "Better than perfect." "And how's our patient's father?" Vincent considered the question. 6 months ago, he'd been a man defined by his wealth, his power, his ability to control outcomes through force or manipulation. Today, he was defined by his relationships, his commitment to making amends, his willingness to show up even when, especially when, he couldn't control the outcome. "Learning," Vincent said honestly. "Still learning how to be the man they need me to be." "That's all any parent can do," Rebecca said with a smile. "The girls are lucky to have you. Both sets of children." As the afternoon wore on, Vincent found himself surrounded by an unlikely but perfect family. Connor dozed fitfully, still groggy from anesthesia, but smiling whenever he woke up to find Vincent still there. Emma and Sophie colored get-well cards at the bedside table, occasionally climbing onto Vincent's lap to show him their artwork. Zoe and Rebecca discussed plans for Connor's recovery with the easy cooperation of 2 women united in their care for the same people. Medical staff came and went, charmed by the obvious love that filled the small room. This was wealth, Vincent realized. Not the zeros in a bank account or the value of a stock portfolio, but the feeling of being surrounded by people who loved you not for what you could give them, but for who you chose to be when giving mattered most. "Dad!" Connor's voice was sleepy but content. Vincent's heart still skipped a beat every time Connor called him that. "Yeah, buddy. When I get out of here, can we work on my college application essays together? I want to write about second chances and what it means to choose family over everything else." Vincent squeezed Connor's hand gently. "I'd be honored to help. Though I should warn you, I'm probably going to cry reading about second chances." "That's okay," Connor murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "Real fathers are allowed to cry." As evening approached and visiting hours neared their end, Vincent gathered his coat and prepared to make the drive back to Brooklyn. His apartment there was small, furnished with second-hand furniture, and filled with the ordinary chaos of a man learning to live a normal life. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers, no staff to handle the details of daily existence. Just a home where Connor's debate team trophies sat next to photos of Emma and Sophie, where law books shared shelf space with parenting guides, where the refrigerator was covered with medical appointment reminders and school event calendars. "Vincent," Zoe called softly as they waited for the elevator. "Yeah, I know this isn't how either of us imagined our lives would turn out. The settlement, the publicity, the way everything changed so quickly." Vincent nodded. "It's not what I planned, that's for sure. But I wanted you to know," Zoe continued, "that watching you choose Connor, choose us, choose to be better than you had to be, it's been the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed." Vincent felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Zoe, I'm not saying this to pressure you or to suggest that we're heading somewhere romantic," she interrupted quickly. "I just wanted you to know that the man I thought I loved 20 years ago, he's real. He was always real. He just got buried under ambition and fear for a while." They stood in comfortable silence as the elevator arrived and carried them down toward the lobby. "For what it's worth," Vincent said as they stepped outside into the crisp evening air, "the woman I fell in love with 20 years ago, the one who was brave enough to raise our son alone, smart enough to build a law practice from nothing, strong enough to hold me accountable for my choices, she's even more amazing than I remembered." Zoe smiled. "We'll see where that goes. Right now, I'm focused on helping Connor recover and watching you continue to become the father he's always needed." "Fair enough," Vincent agreed. "Though I should mention that I plan to be around for a very long time. College visits, graduation, his wedding someday, grandchildren I hope to spoil outrageously. You're stuck with me, Zoe Cross." "Good," she replied. "Connor deserves a father who plans to stick around." As Vincent drove through the Brooklyn streets toward his modest apartment, he thought about the choices that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he'd had everything the world told him mattered: wealth, power, respect, control over his own destiny. Tonight, he had something better: a son who called him dad, an ex-wife who trusted him with their daughters, a woman who'd forgiven him for the unforgivable, and a life built on love instead of conquest. His phone buzzed with a text from Connor. "Thanks for being there today. I love you, Dad." Vincent pulled over to respond, his hands shaking slightly as he typed back, "Thank you for saving me. I love you too, son." As he sat in his modest car on a quiet Brooklyn street, Vincent Corleone realized that he'd finally learned what it meant to win. It wasn't about defeating your enemies or accumulating more than your competitors. It wasn't about power or control or the ability to bend the world to your will. Winning was about becoming someone your children could be proud to call father. It was about choosing love over fear, even when love cost you everything you thought you wanted. It was about understanding that some things, family, redemption, the chance to be better than you used to be, were worth more than all the money in the world. Vincent had been many things in his life: a brilliant businessman, a ruthless competitor, a corporate raider who'd crushed his enemies without mercy. But sitting in that car, reading his son's text message for the 3rd time, Vincent knew that the most important thing he'd ever been was Connor Parker's father. And unlike his empire, unlike his reputation, unlike everything else he'd built and lost, that was something no one could ever take away. Beautiful souls, what a journey this has been. From revenge to redemption, from a billionaire's fall to a father's rise. This story proves that it's never too late to choose love over power. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, drop a comment below telling me about your own second chances, your own moments of choosing what really matters. And please hit that subscribe button, because stories like this, stories about real love, real redemption, and real family, are what we need more of in this world. Thank you for taking this incredible journey with me. Until next time, choose love, choose family, and never stop believing in the power of second chances. Red Heart ***.